start by asking you, how did you want to develop it from the first series, which had been such a hit internationally? How did you move it on?
Well, I mean, that's really more of a question I'd like you should probably put to these guys. I mean, the dynamic here is I've been much more the sort of financial and business end of this equation. You know,
although just I mean, the whole journey did start with Simon. To be fair, Simon came up with the studio. It's a show he's been having his head for 10 years, I think, and right at the start for Series 1, and then kind of came to us and then created it. So it's,
well, yes, thank you. And I did do that bit, but the real work was creatively done by these two guys who own every scene, every character in their heads and live it every single day. My role, which I've enjoyed doing, is trying to create the business framework to do something that's as ambitious as any drama we could think of. And I think when I look at that episode and the others get bigger and bigger, I feel like we're really playing at the top table in terms of any shows that I can think of, whether it a Broadwalk Empire or a Deadwood or those sorts of American shows, but yet completely owned creatively and with its full British integrity. So I think that's what I did in terms of what or helped to do, and in terms of what season 2 is versus series 1. I think that's probably more of a Richard thing.
Richard, I don't know if you've heard this question before, but how did you develop it from the first series then, moving on the characters?
It's interesting, when I think about this, that actually I think in a way series 2 is kind of the show that I'd always imagined. I think what we sort of, Simon came along and said, how about doing a crime show at the time of Jack the Ripper, and that was the sort of the start of that process. So series 1 was very much about engaging with the sort of direct aftermath of the Ripper killings, but what I always felt that gave me as a writer was an opportunity to explore the world and to create a world. What series 2 is then is sort of that world further on. So series 1 was about looking back and trying to deal with the ghosts of the recent past. Series 2 is about what you do when you've laid those ghosts to rest, and life is still just life, and you have to sort of get on and deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So I sort of feel that the second series is embracing the idea of Whitechapel as a character even more than the first series, and sort of divorced from those killings. Move on a year and a half further along. So yes, I think that's definitely my vision for the Street as a whole going forward. Is that it's to be about Whitechapel and the East End at this time at the end of the century.
Sure. That's a good phrase, Whitechapel as a character. I've written that down as one of the questions actually. Can you expand on that a bit, Will?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly when we started, the big decision we made in series 1 was starting 6 months after the killings, the Ripper killing. So you were doing an episodic show, crime show set, and it was looking at Whitechapel as a time and a place, very specifically. And I think it seemed we were very keen to make Whitechapel somewhere that was not just relentlessly grim or kind of dingy. This was a place which was a living and breathing place full of characters that we would care for, that we would care about, and therefore we would be engaged with Reed and his men as they try and bring order to chaos. So it was kind of getting that balance and having something that and it is the show is gritty, I suppose. It has a kind of gritty, but also has, I think, a great. We love our characters, and we love the characters that inhabit Whitechapel, and so hopefully that's what makes the show kind of engaging episode after episode. As we meet more and more characters as we go along. In each episode, you go into a different kind of corner of Whitechapel, I suppose, and explore a different bunch of characters and also different aspects of Whitechapel. And therefore, looking. Whitechapel is part of London, as part of the UK, as part of the world at that time. You get each story kind of takes you into a different aspect of Victorian England.
Fascinating to bring in real-life characters such as John Merrick and Treves. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, I wanted to do it in series 1. Actually. I mean, we know that Merrick was resident at the London Hospital throughout this period, died in April of 1890, and the hospital was, somewhere I wanted to go last year, but it didn't sort of work out that way, so I was keen to go there as quickly as possible. I mean, it still stands proud on Whitechapel High Street as an iconic institution, and again, as Will said, it's about trying to expand our world. So it's the hospital, the music halls, kind of places that we can kind of go and hang out in. And I think also, like Merrick particularly seems to be such a sort of a symbol of the late Victorian period and its sort of obsession with ghoulishness.
It's the same way Jack was, you know, I think that
Yeah.
both of them are almost mythical figures, I think, now. So it's kind of going back and looking at the reality of it.
But it's intriguing that he's obviously involved in the plot now, Merrick, having witnessed
Yeah.
Shine's evil deeds.
That didn't happen.
Oh, well.
Yeah, so that was, you know, it was, he, as we go to episode 2, he has a key role to play in the investigation of the story of the week and also the continuing exploits of Shine. So
Interesting. Where do you think Reed is at the beginning of the series? Obviously his wife's gone, he's still got the guilt about his daughter. How would you describe where he is mentally?
But I think we were keen to move away from, I mean, we felt series 1 we told the story of Matilda, you know, the lost daughter, and I think it was about not, we haven't told, the daughter is nothing to do with this series, you know,
Right.
if we do any more, maybe there'll be something there, but this series was about kind of doing something different there. We told that story, and I think with Deborah and Emily, and it was kind of wanted to put them in a different place.
I suppose what he's doing is, you know, what a lot of people do when life is hard, you just bury yourself in work, and you know, I think that's a sort of day-to-day battle. So it's sort of fractured and alone, and home is a dark and lonely place. But
In contrast to the other two as well, who were
yeah,
in
so
relative
that was
domestic
the conscious
bliss.
decision
Yes.
to try and sort of flip it. So, but you know, that won't last for long.
We saw a hint of possible romance for Reed. Can you give us any details about that?
It was a lady called Jane Cobden who was she was a real person. She was the first woman politician in the country, actually, London County Council, the Pearl Bromley, elected in 1889.
She was elected, but she couldn't vote.
She was a legal writ passed against her that disallowed her to vote. So she comes in episode 3, and then is sort of played through. So it's quite nice to have that thing, you know, to sort of engage with political life at the time as well.
And a strong theme, obviously, seems to overarch the whole series of police corruption. Were you keen to highlight that?
It was just, I mean, it really started with the character actually, rather than sort of thinking we must do something about police corruption. I had, in the run-up to the series, I'd watched my Figures film, Internal Affairs. You know,
Richard Gere and Andy Garcia.
character in that, sort of, can we have something like that? So there was a sort of desire to do that, and then I think also just to look at the opportunities that would be available for an immoral man. It's quite nice to have a sort of dark opposite to Reed in that way. But terrific, Joe Moore, incredibly lucky to get him. Marvellous actor, and we have a lot of fun with him.
I think the other thing as well is corruption is looking at violence within the police, and just that kind of, which is definitely over the 8th, and as we get into the end of the series, becomes a very big part of that, and just the kind of Drake being kind of Reed's bulldog, and kind of really kind of looking and examining that, and how the police work, and how and how Reed is very conflicted about how the police work. That all becomes quite an interesting theme, I think, and it becomes very where we drive towards, I suppose.
The show's relationship with violence, and we sort of ask some questions about that as well as we go on.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. It's very uncompromising. Do you think it's important that it shows life as it was then?
Yeah, and that was, I think, an incredibly well-served period drama in this country.
Could you speak up a little loud,
So
please?
I think we're very well-served for period drama in this country, and I always wanted to do something that sort of perhaps reflected a different kind of reality at the time, and so I think, it was always wanted to try and push that as much as possible.
And warn people against going too close to railings. Obviously, that's one thing.
Yes.
Where do you draw the line? Because that's a very striking but quite shocking opening scene. How do you know where to draw that line?
There's a lot of people on the show. We're the producers and with the BBC, and we watch these things, and we make and we do cut and recut and kind of and are very careful. And often we'll pull back a lot. I mean, there's lots of stuff in the show that we actually, there's a lot more material that isn't in there, and you kind of end up in the edit, and it's
DVD extras, no doubt.
maybe. So it's we take it very seriously, you know. And we have I hope now, a loyal audience that have watched series 1 and they know what to expect with Ripper Street, you know. And there is, the way, we don't shy away from violence, but I don't think we're in any way exploitative, and I think we're it's just part of the world, I think, and so I hope we get the level right.
Sure.
I think we have this year. I think.
And the other thing that was discussed a lot in the first series was the depiction of women and the role of women in that area. Can you talk about that a bit in the second series?
Well, I think we moved the Long Susan character is in a very different place by the end of episode 8 this year than she is at the beginning, and I think it has to, it's really, really interesting what Mayanna's done with that character as well, and bringing in Jane Cobden as well. It's sort of, I think, trying to look at in the first series I wanted to be very, very sort of honest about the realities of life at the time, and I think kind of the world is moving forward into the 1890s, which is still uncompromising and difficult, but there are, I think again the show wants to ask questions about itself, and I think that Long Susan becomes increasingly important in the show.
And Rose as well. We have Rose comes back, who's now in the at the music hall, and she has a storyline that goes through the series. She's trying to kind of find another way through life. I think it's the challenge with this show is it's a police show, and we will never, we're not going to have a female copper. It's just not going to. It wouldn't be true to the show. So it's kind of how we build up a world that we've got, and I think we've done that in a really interesting way this year with Susan, Rose, and Jane, kind of to try and have really interesting stories that feel part of Whitechapel, part of the kind of the crime stories that we kind of tell.
One of the great attractions of the series is the relationship between three male leads. I think someone described it as a bit like Star Trek. Those three leads. Would you make that comparison, the kind of bickering love-hate thing that goes on?
It's a bromance, isn't it?
A bromance.
I mean, kind of things like Butch Cassidy and the Sun Mills did. It's just that sort of guys hanging out, kind of capering about, what's not tonight.
I think I was there from the very first document that we, when we first started talking about it.
We were talking about kind of duos, Mawson Lewis, and felt like there was a lot of duos around the place. It would just be a kind of fun to sort of create three people that can all sort of do different things, and if you want to dig into it, deeply, that Reed is the centre, and kind of Drake represents the past, and Dexter represents the future, and they both represent warring sides of his inner life, I suppose. It's the way I like to think of it. And, I enjoyed it all. And then also you'll meet them later, but the guys, they all get on so well. In any case, so it's just wind them up and let them go, really.
Did you find yourself writing more for the actors once they were cast and you got to know them?
Process, I think, as you get to know them, their many strengths, and it's quite a sort of joyful thing that when you start to sort of know that somebody can do something very, very well.
Fighting, for instance.
Jerome's good at fighting.
He's in good shape.
Yeah, very, very envy-making. Would anyone like to ask a question from the audience? Yes,
I'd like to ask Richard more about the Rose character. You say she's moves into the music hall. Can you explain more about their development? So she quits being a prostitute, does she?
At the end of the last series, she's left the life, and we pick her up in episode 3 this year, and she's working in music halls. Not on the stage yet, but kind of as a waitress. But life's very hard. It's very, very day to day. Boarding houses. Again, sort of reality of what it would be. And of course, Drake's married to somebody else now. Did she miss out on the right guy? These questions that we ask as we sort of go through sort of tense relationship between her and Bella Drake. Yeah, I don't want to say too much, but you know, by the end of it, you know, she gets her day in the sun, but it's hard for her as well.
So is stardom ahead for her?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. That's what she would like.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
I wanted to ask Simon about the advantages of filming at the Clancy Barracks in Dublin. What does that give to the show?
I mean, you know, it was chosen because it's just the best place that anybody could find. Our brilliant producer, Stephen Smallwood, who may not be here today, but anyway, he went to everywhere, all over England, all over Ireland, Scotland, Wales, anywhere where it could make sense. We just chanced upon a brilliant place where we could shoot mostly, well, the majority of it at the studio itself and base the whole production there and take over the whole place essentially. And if you go there, I think a lot of people here have been there before, but to see the set, but it is just an incredible real world with often, you know, natural light in and out of interiors where, you know, where not often you'd be shooting in a studio, but in fact we're shooting inside real buildings, which I just think makes a huge difference. So it feels like you're on location pretty much all the time, even when we're shooting at the studio. And it creates a bigger, more filmic, more feature film flavour than you'd normally get from a police show, I think.
And it really helps with one of the decisions very early on was to really try and not use CGI, to try and, you know, I think on TV budgets you can never do it like Guy Ritchie does in Sherlock Holmes, you can never match that, and I think it always looks a bit, so we try and do as little as possible. So the great thing about the sets there, you can shoot 360 and kind of just it's all kind of there, and you know, obviously we do a little bit here and there to, where required, but it's most of it's in front of you and you can touch it and it's real and it's good.
How long was the shoot for the second series?
19 weeks.
19 weeks.
And the ambition of the show as well. I mean, that horrific scene where they have a fight in the cookhouse and so forth. I mean, is that hard to achieve on a TV budget?
Yeah, I mean that was shot in a day in Clancy Barracks in a tiny little room with everyone there sweating their foreheads off. It was Tom Shanklin is a fantastic director, incredibly resourceful, and you know it's tough and it's I think it's not like the Hollywood movies, but it's got its own kind of I think it works very well. And but all
One of the great things I think about everybody who works on the show is that you can sit there and say something ridiculous, like, wouldn't it be great if we did like a sort of kung fu revenge narrative and no one says don't be ridiculous, so everybody goes right, yeah. So you know, Tom's brilliant for that, Stephen, and I think particularly a man called Mark Geraghty, who's our production designer, who is just so incredibly resourceful with these things, just seems to be able to kind of click his fingers and produce, you know, a heroin cookhouse or whatever it is. And it's I think actually kind of one of the great things about being in Ireland is that all the crews there kind of work on movies as much as they work on TV, so there's a real sort of feeling about what to do their work to the best of their ability at all times. Like beneficiaries of incredible crews.
And if you were lucky enough to get a third series, have you already thought about where you could take the characters?
Yeah, very much.
You can't tell us, presumably.
I mean, we'd love to do it. Who knows until it goes out and we see if people watch it. But I think certainly at the end of series 1 we left it very closed. I think we were, that's the way it ended. And this year, I think we take things. People end up in a different place to where they start in the series. I think that's quite interesting with Reed and Drake and Jackson especially. So it would be interesting to happen. It would be lovely, but we'll see.
Richard, Curtis asked you, where do you actually go for your research? Because it seemed very real, very positive, especially seeing the Elephant Man and people like that.
A guy called Leo Hollis, who's a London historian who is available to us at all times, and he is a great source of information. And we also have a wonderful guy called Keith Skinner, who's what you would probably call a ripperologist, who is a police historian really, and he does so he can give us all the kind of original rap sheets and those sort of things for the language and stuff. So it's take history pretty seriously, but also I think it's almost like we see what the reality is, get the flavour of it, and then chuck it out and start again. So.
And use your imagination.
Yes, Ben.
Just to expand on that, where do you get a feel for the sort of rhythms of the day-to-day language and particularly sort of vocabulary? I think I've misheard the word gear was used in those drugs, is that right? I was just quite surprised to...
Yeah, so Jackson's allowed to say stuff that other people wouldn't,
Yeah.
which is just my own little rule that I have for
I
myself.
didn't actually say gear in those days, though.
Well, the word exists. I mean, there's a you know, the etymology of it is
Right.
it is. I'm pretty kind of scrupulous about
Yeah.
words existing, but if you know, particularly Jackson used them in a sort of absolute contemporary.
Where do you source the kind of spoken language? Obviously, there's no sort of few recordings of that.
I read a lot of Victorian newspapers and kind of particularly sort of like the Penny Dreadfuls and those sorts of things. But it was just something that I had a run at really, it's the other writer on the show, Toby Finlay, has a very kind of sort of slightly different idiom as well. But I think something that we wanted to be very kind of free with and enjoy as much as possible.
And are you a Breaking Bad fan? Is that why you had a cookhouse?
Say again?
Are you a Breaking Bad fan? I was wondering why you had a
I hadn't watched it yet.
Well, I'm sort of just beginning series 2, so it's sort of I'm a bit behind the 8 ball on that.
No joke about cookhouses here.
Right, yeah.
Finally, I wanted to ask, Ripper is in the title. Why do you think we're still so fascinated with Jack the Ripper?
I think it was something very particular about what happened in that autumn of '88, and it was sort of a kind of a perfect storm of those events and the printing press and the tabloid press and just London changing and just suddenly the spotlight being put on Whitechapel. And there was just all these things happening. It became something. It wasn't just about those 5 terrible murders. It was something. Jack becomes he's iconic. Something iconic about him. What he represents is, I think people talk about him, but it represents so much more than just that man. So I don't know.
It was also the first global sort of media manhunt. So it wasn't just here; it was everywhere in the world. In America, it resonates. Weirdly, when we were setting up the show, you know, you get a newspaper outside your hotel room sometimes. You're going to get the door. I was in LA and I picked up this newspaper and there was a headline about Jack the Ripper while we were trying to sell this in America on the front page of the LA Times. It's like, there's an extraordinary sort of resonance. But I think we're sitting here with the press. I think it was a press-driven thing that happened at a particular moment, and somehow it just became fascinating. It sort of and represents London in a macabre and fascinating way.
When the fact it wasn't caught, I think, definitely part of it. When we have episode 3 opens with in the music hall with a kind of reenactment of 8 Little Halls, which was a song about Jack the Ripper, and we kind of so it's all that kind of thing of him very quickly becoming part of popular culture. That's within 2 years of the events, and I think that stuff's very interesting.
What he is for us, in a way, kind of going forward, is like a springboard to create like a sort of folkloric space as much as possible, and for characters to be kind of bigger in that context, and that he is like the kind of great bogeyman of the industrial age, and sort of London kind of became like a sort of billboard for London in a kind of macabre way. Very useful to us.
Great. Well, I would just like to say a very big thank you to Simon, Richard and Will, and we've got past interviews after a brief coffee break, but thank you very, very much.